Story 1.
In a perplexing maritime mystery that has left investigators and the public alike stunned, the lone vessel known as the Eagle Hauler was discovered in April 1998, adrift off the remote desert coastline of the Gulf of Mexico. This imposing vessel, which had become an eerie symbol of maritime enigma, was famously dubbed a ghost ship due to the absence of any human presence on board. The Eagle Hauler, which was found to be carrying a myriad of containers filled with a diverse array of goods, including consumer products, electronics, and auto parts, left a trail of bafflement in its wake. This seemingly derelict vessel held within its metallic confines an enigma that had eluded investigators for months. The eerie tale of the Eagle Hauler began when it embarked from the bustling port of Hamburg, Germany, just a few months prior to its discovery in the Gulf of Mexico. The ship, its crew of 17 souls, and its valuable cargo had seemingly vanished into thin air a mere week after setting sail from the European port. A massive search effort was launched, but despite extensive efforts, the ship remained elusive, with the whereabouts of the entire crew shrouded in a cloud of mystery. However, a breakthrough in unraveling the enigmatic tale came to light when a diary, meticulously maintained by Dr. John Smith, the ship's esteemed medical officer, was discovered. Dr. Smith was renowned among shipping companies for his professionalism, sharp intellect, and compassionate nature. He was a doctor who left an indelible mark on every ship he served on, earning him unwavering respect and frequent invitations to be part of various maritime ventures. It is from Dr. Smith's own words, as recorded in his diary, that we can begin to piece together the horrifying events that transpired on the Eagle Hauler following its departure from the port of Hamburg. What follows is a riveting account, transcribed from Dr. Smith's diary, of the harrowing journey of the ill-fated ship. September 3rd, 1997. I embarked on a journey that would forever haunt my dreams. The Eagle Hauler, a massive cargo ship, sat silently in the port of Hamburg, waiting to take us into the uncharted reaches of the ocean. The sky above was a dark, foreboding blue, reminiscent of a vast velvet blanket covering our uncertain path. As I stood on the deck, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of tranquility. The crew, a collection of diverse and enigmatic individuals, had gathered to usher in the start of our long and treacherous voyage. I knew some of them by name, faces etched in memory, but not all. Among them was our captain, a man of great repute, Carl McCaw. He was a veteran of the sea, a man who had weathered countless storms and stared into the abyss, his equanimity and wisdom evident in every line etched on his face. My introduction to Captain McCaw was a memorable one, taking place at one of the raucous sailors' parties that seemed like a distant memory now. He had a magnetic presence that drew people to him, and after that unforgettable evening, he had extended an invitation to me to join his crew. At the time, I thought it was a good deal. The rest of the crew, a motley assortment of characters, remained shrouded in mystery. I knew I would have the duration of this voyage to unravel the enigmas that surrounded them. September 4th, 1997 dawned with an air of expectancy aboard the Eagle Hauler. The light of a new day revealed a crew as diverse as the tempestuous sea itself. As we prepared to embark on this journey, the faces of my fellow sailors took on new meaning, each with a different story to tell. Captain Carl McCaw, the steely-eyed master of our vessel, commanded respect and reverence. He was the beacon of our ship, responsible for navigation, issuing commands, and liaising with the port authorities. His wisdom and experience were evident in every word he spoke, a true mariner in every sense. The chain of command extended to First Mate Captain Anna Smith, a woman whose reputation for reliability and exceptional navigational skills preceded her. Second mate John Reynolds, with his weathered features and a deep well of experience, was always ready to lend a hand at the helm. His dedication to the crew and his unwavering determination made him an invaluable member of our seafaring family. Among the sailors, Luke Jones and Carl Hope were the heart and soul of our crew. Luke's sense of humor was a beacon of light in the often dark world of a long-haul sailor. His laughter was infectious, and his stories of the sea kept our spirits high. Carl, on the other hand, was a bundle of boundless energy, an ever-friendly presence that brightened our days. Below deck, we had the machinists, Michael Brown and Sarah Wilson. Michael, the chief machinist, possessed a silent determination that bordered on grimness. His technical prowess was unquestionable, and in the face of mechanical challenges, he was unwavering. Sarah, his assistant, had an air of quiet confidence about her, a reserve that hinted at a depth of knowledge waiting to be tapped. The stewards and galley attendants, Lisa Martin and David Wallace, ensured that the crew was well fed and cared for. Electrical engineers Alexandra Harper and Daniel Zhao were the guardians of our ship's power. Their technical expertise was crucial, ensuring that our lights and systems continued to function smoothly. Navigators Richard Jones and Allison Carter were the cartographers of our destiny, guiding us through uncharted waters with precision and care. Meteorologist James Smith kept an eye on the ever-changing moods of the skies, offering vital information to Captain McCaw. The meteorologist's predictions often meant the difference between safety and peril on our journey. And finally, shipping agent Linda Wilson, the organizer of all port services, logistics, and financial matters. Her role was very important in making sure our voyages went smoothly. In the depths of the ship, we were joined by fellow longshoremen Mark Stevens and Drake. These two rugged individuals were the backbone of our crew, toiling tirelessly to ensure the cargo was loaded and unloaded efficiently. I had my assistant nurse Natalie with me. We had been working together for quite some time. She is a professional. As a doctor, my role was to know every member of the crew intimately, to be their confidant, their healer. September 5th, 1997, presented itself as a day brimming with both possibilities and curiosities. The crew of the Eagle Hauler remained in good health, leaving me with ample time to delve deeper into the mysteries of our ship. My passion for the sea had only intensified over the years, a burning desire that had led me to the deck of this impressive vessel. As a child, I had dreamt of becoming a ship's captain, but the ironclad will of my father had steered me down a different path, and I found myself studying to become a doctor. Yet, the allure of the open ocean had never left me, and the call of the sea still echoed in my soul. This voyage offered me a chance, albeit in a different capacity, to satisfy my longing for maritime life. My thirst for knowledge led me to explore the Eagle Hauler in great detail. It was a ship that embodied modernity and technology, a behemoth equipped with the latest state-of-the-art systems. I reveled in the opportunity to dissect its inner workings. Our navigation equipment was second to none, featuring GPS systems and electronic charts that ensured precise positioning and routing. Radars and anti-collision systems stood vigilant, constantly scanning the horizon for potential threats and ensuring the safety of our voyage. Automated course control and vessel stabilization systems made for a smooth and efficient journey, even in the roughest of waters. The engine room revealed powerful and efficient engines, their operation overseen by advanced control systems designed to optimize fuel consumption. Computers monitored every aspect of the ship's mechanical systems, their constant vigilance a testament to our commitment to safety and efficiency. The electrical power equipment was equally impressive. boasting power generators with emergency switching and redundancy capabilities to guarantee an uninterrupted power supply. The ship's state-of-the-art communication and navigation systems included radio systems for contact with other vessels and shore stations, as well as satellite communication systems for voice and data transmission in remote maritime regions. Safety remained paramount, with modern firefighting and emergency alert systems in place to protect both the crew and our precious cargo. Tracking and access control measures were implemented to deter unauthorized entry and ensure our ship's security. But what truly left an indelible impression on me was the lifting equipment. Modern cranes, forklifts, and various other devices designed for the efficient loading and unloading of cargo. As I explored further, I even came across automation systems that controlled the ship, including autopilot and energy management systems. It was with a hint of jest that I remarked to Captain McCaw that with such advanced equipment, one might wonder if the role of captain and crew would become obsolete, replaced by artificial intelligence and automation. The captain's response was a grim chuckle, and he cautioned me not to underestimate the power of the sea. The ocean, he said, had a way of revealing its true nature when least expected, no matter how advanced the technology at our disposal. I took his words to heart, sensing an unspoken truth lurking beneath the surface. September 7th, 1997. As the first week of our voyage unfolded, the Eagle Hauler cut through the waters without incident, the vast expanse of the ocean stretching out in all directions. A sense of routine settled over the crew as everyone diligently carried out their duties. The ship's advanced technology hummed in the background, a testament to human innovation and the indomitable spirit of exploration. All seemed well, and there was no sign of impending trouble. However, it was on a dark and eerily calm night that the first tendrils of unease began to weave their way into the tapestry of our journey. Murmurs among the crew members gave voice to unsettling tales of strange noises emanating from the depths of the ship. But it was not just the spectral specters of the night that would disturb our peace. A fortuitous celebration, the meteorologist James Smith's birthday party, brought an unforeseen consequence. James, reveling in the festivities, indulged in more libations than his body could handle. He awoke the next day with a throbbing headache and a gnawing sense of regret. His hangover had clouded his judgment, leading us to overlook the approach of a major storm, a tempest that should have set off alarms. The storm raged with a ferocity that tested the mettle of our ship and crew. The Eagle Hauler was tossed and turned in the tumultuous sea, its massive bulk at the mercy of the elements. We emerged from the maelstrom battered but intact, though the ship bore the scars of the ordeal. The state-of-the-art equipment that had once been our pride now lay in disarray, a broken link to the world beyond. Communication with the shore was severed, a consequence of the tempest's wrath. The captain, ever stoic, was not one to entertain excuses. He demanded that the problem be resolved with utmost urgency. However, for reasons that remained shrouded in mystery, the ship's cutting-edge technology eluded our grasp. It was either too advanced for our engineers to fathom, or the necessary spare parts for repair were nowhere to be found. The isolation we experienced was growing, the tendrils of the unknown weaving their way into our lives. It was among the loading crew, the men who toiled in the shadow of the cargo, that the most disturbing whispers surfaced. They claimed to have seen a massive, lurking shadow moving among the crates and containers. Their accounts were met with skepticism by the captain, who believed that fatigue and fear could play tricks on the mind. However, for the sake of safety, he ordered a vigilant watch over the ship's cameras and a strict mandate against wandering the ship alone. September 10th, 1997. A somber cloud descended upon the Eagle Hauler in the wake of the relentless storm. Days blurred into one another as we navigated the unpredictable waters of the Atlantic Ocean, each sunrise and sunset a reminder of our isolation. The situation on the ship grew grimmer by the hour, as a pervasive sense of unease took hold. It was a few days after the storm when a disquieting revelation struck the heart of our already troubled crew. The news swept through the ship. Agent Linda Wilson was missing. She hadn't been seen in days, and her absence was marked by untouched items in her quarters. Linda was last seen leaving the mess hall, her figure slowly disappearing into the darkness. Concern etched lines on Captain Carl McCaw's face as I approached him, seeking answers to the disquieting mystery. "We've looked everywhere for her, John," he confessed, his voice heavy with worry. "No sign of her. It's as if Linda just disappeared into thin air. It's unlikely she fell overboard. I'd even say it's impossible." I couldn't help but question the ship's surveillance system, which boasted an array of cameras. Surely they would have recorded something, shedding light on Linda's disappearance. But Captain McCaw's response was disheartening. "The storm wreaked havoc on the surveillance system. Half the cameras are out of commission, and the rest only show static. To make matters worse, our communications are still down. This is unprecedented in all my years at sea, John." Desperation and dread gnawed at the edges of our collective psyche as we grappled with the inexplicable disappearance of one of our own. Within a day of Linda's vanishing, an unsettling discovery was made. Her ID and watch were found abandoned behind a maze of pipes near the engine room. The circumstances surrounding how her belongings ended up there were a haunting enigma. No one had seen anything, and the lack of functional cameras in that part of the ship meant that the shadows held their secrets close. And yet, it will remain a strange, terrifying dream. Soon, according to our itinerary, we must complete this journey and reach the port of New York. September 14th, 1997. Our voyage across the vast expanse of the ocean continued without an end in sight. The journey had become an interminable stretch of time, and the arrival in port, which should have occurred days ago, remained elusive. A heavy shroud of uncertainty enveloped the ship, a palpable tension that infected the crew. The silence of the captain, Carl McCaw, hung like a cloud over the vessel, leaving an eerie void where reassurance should have been. The crew, once a cohesive unit, was now a collection of nervous glances and hushed conversations. The anxiety in the air was as thick as the sea spray that lashed our decks. The unanswered question of our prolonged journey loomed large, gnawing at the fringes of my mind. When I sought explanations from the crew, they were as lost as I was. Frustration and fear painted their faces, and they all pointed to the captain and his closest aides for answers. I decided to confront the source of our collective disquiet and make my way to the captain's quarters. But fate intervened, leading me to eavesdrop on a conversation between our first mate, Anna Smith, and the second mate, John Reynolds. Their voices were hushed, their words laden with apprehension. They discussed a navigational error that had led our ship astray. John Reynolds questioned the autopilot's involvement in such a grave miscalculation. He suspected that someone with nefarious intentions had tampered with the system, deliberately altering our course. It was a revelation that sent a chill down my spine. The gravity of the situation struck me, and I understood that they were laboring to restore the autopilot system, attempting to guide us back to our original route. Another disturbing revelation emerged from their conversation: the disappearance of Steward David Wallace. His belongings, they said, had been discovered behind the water supply bay, a bloody testament to an unknown horror. The unease that gripped my heart had deepened into a sense of foreboding that seemed inescapable. Though I had stumbled upon this conversation by chance, I could not remain silent. My duty as a doctor and a member of this crew compelled me to confront the captain and seek answers. When I approached him, Carl McCaw waved me off dismissively, his words laden with an air of reassurance that did little to dispel the pervasive darkness. September 16th, 1997. The descent into darkness on the Eagle Hauler took a malevolent turn. The veil of dread that had wrapped itself around the ship thickened with each passing day. My assistant nurse, Natalie, was the latest victim of this sinister force that seemed to lurk among us. First Assistant Captain Anna Smith, bearing witness to a nightmarish ordeal, reported hearing blood-curdling screams echoing through the hallways. She rushed to the source of the screams, but upon arrival found nothing but an empty, eerie silence. Electricians Alexandra Harper and Daniel Zhao, disturbed by the same cries, joined the frantic search. The trio discovered drops of blood forming a gruesome trail, leading them to a nightmarish scene. Natalie's femur had been torn from her body by unimaginable force, leaving a horrific tableau of terror. The rest of her was nowhere to be found. I wept for my lost companion, for Natalie and I had shared years of service, and her absence left a void in my heart. The realization struck us with a force that threatened to drown us all in a sea of horror. The perpetrator of these atrocities was among us, a silent specter hidden in plain sight. The panic that had gripped the ship was a contagion that spread from soul to soul. As a doctor, I knew the perils of prolonged isolation and severed communication with the outside world. Such conditions could gnaw at the edges of sanity, inviting the abyss of mental instability. I ventured my theory to Captain Carl McCaw, who admitted to sharing my concerns. He proposed a preventative measure, a collective conversation with the crew. In the midst of this nightmarish uncertainty, it was a glimmer of hope. A forum for the crew to share their fears, and perhaps, just perhaps, unveil the face of Natalie's murderer among us. It was a surprising turn of events. The once stubborn captain had conceded his earlier attempts to withhold information, realizing that transparency was our only weapon against the darkness that had enveloped us. September 17th, 1997. The eerie darkness that had enshrouded the Eagle Hauler extended into the early morning. Captain Carl McCaw and I embarked on a grim endeavor, individually calling each crew member for discussions. While I lacked the qualifications of a medical psychologist, my basic knowledge allowed me to pose pertinent questions, recording their answers and scrutinizing their behavior for any telltale signs of disturbance. As the interviews progressed, a disconcerting uniformity emerged. The crew members went about their duties diligently, their composure intact. They had not exhibited any sense of loneliness or despair prior to the spate of disappearances that had cast its shadow over our journey. There was a collective belief that our ordeal would soon come to an end when we reached port. Hope was a fragile ember, struggling to ignite against the encroaching darkness. However, a recurring theme emerged during these conversations, one that sent shivers down my spine. Many of the crew members insisted they had heard strange, disquieting noises at night. The captain and I had not personally experienced these sounds, but the persistence and consistency of the claims were unsettling. The cargo crew, the captain's aides, and even the meteorologist attested to the eerie cacophony that pervaded the ship after dark. 2 crew members drew our attention, sparking unease within the crew. Drake, one of the cargo crew, maintained that a malevolent black entity stalked the ship, feasting upon the crew in the dead of night. He claimed to have witnessed it and had attempted to share his revelation with others, but they dismissed his words as the ramblings of a terrified mind. Drake's fear was palpable, rendering him a near recluse who cowered within his quarters. We had to convince him, almost forcibly, to join our conversation. The second individual who aroused suspicion was the machinist, Michael Brown. Always reserved and distant from the rest of the crew, he exhibited nervous behavior during the conversation. His statements were disjointed and contradictory, casting a sinister shadow over his demeanor. The captain and I shared our concerns regarding Michael's behavior, recognizing it as a potential lead to uncovering the truth behind the ship's descent into madness. Following the preventative conversations, Captain McCaw and I made the unsettling decision to closely monitor Drake and Michael. Their peculiar behavior and the disquieting claims they had made demanded our attention. September 19th, 1997. The situation aboard the Eagle hauler had spiraled into chaos. It became increasingly evident that the specter of madness had infiltrated our ship, sowing discord and mistrust among the crew. We weren't the only ones who suspected Michael the machinist. Others had noticed his erratic behavior, and Alexander Harper, an electrical engineer, had stumbled upon a disturbing secret. In a bold revelation, Harper disclosed that he had witnessed Michael hiding something within the confines of his cabin. The gravity of this revelation was undeniable, and it led to a fateful decision. Captain McCaw and I took it upon ourselves to investigate Michael's quarters and found some of the missing steward's belongings. Why had Michael hidden this undeniable evidence of his guilt? I could not find an answer to this question. Apparently, traveling by sea had negatively affected Michael's psyche, and he was no longer responsible for his actions, could not think straight. While the investigation continued within the confines of Michael's cabin, turmoil erupted on the ship. Luke Jones, one of the sailors, descended into a frenzy, intent on delivering a savage beating to the beleaguered machinist. It was a violent outbreak that threatened to escalate into a shipwide lynching, had it not been for the timely intervention of First Mate Anna Smith. In the wake of this chaotic scene, we were left with no alternative but to take Michael into custody. The crew assigned themselves in shifts to guard him, understanding that the darkness that had consumed one of our own could just as easily take hold of others. As we sailed onward, the prevailing hope was that the worst of the ordeal had passed, and the journey to port would proceed without further accidents or disappearances. However, the oppressive atmosphere that had taken root within the ship continued to linger, like an unrelenting fog that obscured the path to salvation. September 21st, 1997. The horrors on the Eagle hauler seemed to possess an insatiable appetite for darkness, as they refused to release their grip on our ship. Luke Jones, the formidable sailor who had once sought vengeance against Michael, had now become the latest victim of the malevolent force that stalked us. Luke was a behemoth of a man, towering in stature and possessing the strength of a titan. In his youth, he had made a name for himself in the brutal world of professional bare-knuckle fighting. It was difficult to fathom who or what could overpower a man of his stature. Panic and desperation ensued as we combed the ship in search of the missing sailor. Our quest ended in a gruesome discovery that sent shivers down our spines. Luke's lifeless body had been reduced to a macabre tapestry of carnage. His once mighty form lay torn asunder, bearing wounds that appeared to have been inflicted by a savage, wild animal. As I examined the gruesome remnants of the man I had known, I couldn't help but entertain the horrifying notion that Drake's ramblings might hold a kernel of truth. Perhaps in the shadowy recesses of the ship, an evil force, something beyond our comprehension, was lurking. Michael, the machinist who had been under close surveillance for a full day, was now absolved of suspicion. The evidence of his guilt had unraveled, leaving him innocent but still under careful watch. The situation remained dire, and the captain and I grappled with the realization that the malevolent presence among us remained elusive. Trapped in the boundless expanse of the unforgiving ocean, cut off from the outside world and devoid of functioning communication equipment, we were at the mercy of an unseen predator. The surveillance cameras remained dormant, the autopilot malfunctioned, and the ocean's vastness offered no escape. Our tormentor, whether a sinister entity or a cunning individual, reveled in the cat-and-mouse game, savoring the despair that had settled upon the Eagle Hauler. September 26, 1997, marked the descent into a maelstrom of madness and terror aboard the Eagle Hauler. The malevolent force that had been haunting us showed no respite, and the frequency of disappearances escalated to an alarming degree. First, it was the navigators who vanished into the abyss of the ship's corridors. Then the second mate of the captain followed, vanishing without a trace. In the wake of these eerie disappearances, one of the loaders met a similar fate. John, our trusted meteorologist, went missing next, leaving us without the guidance of his expertise. The grim pattern of disappearance continued when one of the electricians, Alexander, undertook a perilous journey to repair the faltering communication equipment. He never had the chance to complete his task, and at the sight of his vanishing, we were greeted with a haunting message daubed in blood upon the walls. Games are over. With each passing day, the crew grew more reclusive, retreating to their cabins in a desperate bid to escape the clutches of the malevolent presence that lurked aboard the ship. The vessel itself had become a labyrinth of fear, devoid of functioning navigational systems and plagued by a malfunctioning autopilot. The captain, once our beacon of leadership, was now lost in a storm of technical malfunctions and panic. Nature itself seemed to have turned against us as we found ourselves ensnared by another raging storm. The tempest howled outside, a malevolent chorus that mirrored the terror that had gripped our hearts. I, too, was overwhelmed by fear, cowering within my cabin, dreading the moment when the unseen predator would come for me. The captain had intended to gather us all in a single room, seeking safety in numbers and the opportunity for collective vigilance. But his plan remained unrealized, for he too succumbed to the relentless tide of disappearances. His absence left us adrift, our once unshakable leader vanishing into the abyss. None of us dared to venture in search of him, weighed down by the looming specter of our own impending doom. It was First Mate Anna Smith and I who summoned the courage to embark on the perilous quest to locate our captain. September 29, 1997. Our quest to find the captain ended in horror. We discovered only a gruesome relic of his presence, a severed head with part of his face gnawed away. The wall beside his remains bore a macabre message written in blood. "Your dessert." The chilling words sent shivers down our spines, and we understood that our tormentor reveled in terrorizing us. First Mate Anna Smith was visibly horrified by the gruesome discovery, and she urged us to heed the captain's plan. Gather all remaining crew members in the common room of the mess hall. Through the radio room, we broadcast the call, hoping to unite all who remained. However, by evening, only 5 of us had braved the gathering. Anna, the previously suspected machinist Michael, second electrician Daniel Zhao, and sailor Carl Hope. The whereabouts of the other crew members remained a mystery, leaving us to speculate whether they were missing or cowering in their cabins, paralyzed by fear. Anna and I recognized the necessity of taking turns on duty, for trust had eroded to the point of near extinction. While I harbored some level of trust for Anna, doubts lingered, particularly in regard to Michael. We wrestled with the disconcerting possibility that the murderer could be among us, or that the enigmatic, unholy entity Drake had warned about was real and lurking somewhere aboard the vessel. Drake himself had vanished, adding another layer of uncertainty to our dire predicament. The Eagle Hauler, once a vessel of purpose, had transformed into a foreboding trap, setting sail on an unknown course. The five of us, huddled in the dimly lit mess hall, trembled with fear and paranoia. I clung to my diary as a thread of sanity in the unraveling tapestry of terror that enshrouded us. We had no inkling of how long we could endure this nightmare, but one thing was certain. We were determined not to become the next course in this sinister feast. October 1st, 1997, I was jarred awake by a blood-curdling scream, a sound that sent shivers through my already frayed nerves. In a surreal, nightmarish scene, I witnessed something unimaginable. Zhao, the second electrician, under attack. A dark, massive, and furry assailant tore at his flesh, clawing viciously at his legs. Zhao's agonized screams pierced the air as this monstrous entity dragged him away, disappearing down the shadowy corridor. Panic gripped me as I scanned the room for Anna, Michael, or some semblance of an explanation. Yet Anna was nowhere to be found, and Michael's absence added to the mounting unease. Carl, who sat beside me, seemed in a trance, repeating the word werewolf in a trembling voice. My futile attempts to rouse him and inquire about Anna's whereabouts yielded no response. In a shocking turn of events, Carl abruptly stood, seized a knife, and with a rapid, deliberate motion, slit his own throat. His blood sprayed across my face, an eerie baptism of terror. Stunned and horrified by Carl's inexplicable act, I was temporarily immobilized. It wasn't until Drake materialized seemingly out of nowhere that I was yanked from the grip of shock. He urged me to act, insisting that we had to flee. My initial bewilderment gave way to the sheer urgency of the situation, and I followed him without hesitation. The sole question echoing in my mind was, "Where is Anna?" Drake, my newfound guide in this nightmarish scenario, led me to a hidden technical compartment within the ship. He swiftly opened an iron grate cover, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. My confusion and fear rendered me entirely reliant on Drake's guidance, and I followed him blindly through this labyrinth of pipes and iron beams. After a lengthy descent, we arrived at a concealed chamber that had served as Drake's refuge. Surrounded by bars and metal, this hidden enclave was indiscernible from the outside. However, the true horror lay within, as Drake revealed the mountain of human bones that had amassed over time. The sheer sight of it sent shivers down my spine, and I recoiled in terror. Drake's laughter rang out, an eerie sound that seemed tinged with madness. My instinct was to retreat, as I feared that I had been lured into a trap, and that Drake intended to add me to the grisly collection of remains. However, Drake dispelled my fears, insisting that he harbored no sinister intent. He explained that this chamber was a sanctuary, a haven of safety from the malevolent entities that had laid waste to the ship. Drake's frenzied narrative unveiled a horrifying tale. He claimed that we were situated above the creature's nest, safe because the overpowering stench of decay masked our human scent. He spoke with the fervor of one who had defied these horrors and lived to tell the tale. Drake insisted that he had outwitted these monsters, demonstrating a dark determination to assert his newfound authority. When I inquired about his experiences, Drake cryptically alluded to having seen everything and declared himself the new captain, asserting that his word was law. The realization that my sanity teetered on the brink sent a cold shiver down my spine, as the boundaries of reality and nightmarish fantasy blurred in the hellish bowels of the ship. Date unknown time has become an abstract concept. I am adrift in a sea of eternal night. Drake and I spent what felt like an eternity within the confines of our refuge. Days blurred into one another as our provisions dwindled and desperation crept in. It was then that Drake, his sanity waning, attempted to end my life in a futile bid to survive. A brutal struggle ensued, and by some miraculous twist of fate, I managed to thwart his murderous intent. In the throes of despair, Drake experienced a sudden, inexplicable revelation. Whether it was a brush with death or the consequences of dehydration, his mind, for a fleeting moment, regained clarity. His dark intentions evaporated, replaced by a grim determination to venture into the ship in search of sustenance for both of us. With newfound resolve, he departed, leaving me in the confines of our shelter. The hours, days, or perhaps even weeks that followed passed in agonizing isolation. I clung to the bars that separated me from the rest of the forsaken vessel, yearning for Drake's return. When at last a distant noise disrupted the eerie silence, I strained my eyes and ears to discern its source. Slowly, the shapes of two nightmarish creatures materialized, gnawing ravenously on a macabre feast, Drake's lifeless body. Their monstrous hunger satiated, the creatures succumbed to exhaustion, and with haunting transformation, shifted from beast to human. I watched, transfixed by horror and disbelief, as Michael and Anna emerged from the bestial transformation. These monstrous creatures that had haunted our hellish voyage were none other than my former shipmates. Michael stirred first, rousing Anna from her feral slumber. Their whispers sent shivers down my spine, for it was a cruel revelation of evil. Anna contended that I might have leaped into the unforgiving embrace of the open ocean, mimicking the fate of second mate John Reynolds. Michael, on the other hand, said that I was hiding somewhere and by all means he wanted to find me and catch me, that he still really wanted his dessert. A chilling declaration left no room for doubt. Their sinister exchange of sibling-like camaraderie revealed the true extent of the horror that had consumed them. But the most chilling realization of all was that I no longer cared for my fate. In the shadow of death, I found solace in knowing that I had not become the cannibalistic monster's dessert. Last diary entry, Dad. You were right. I should have just worked at the hospital as a regular doctor. In the end, I remained in the hidden compartment, clutching my diary. The ship continued to drift aimlessly, a ghostly vessel carrying the remnants of a crew and the nightmares that had consumed them. The Eagle Hauler, once a symbol of human ingenuity and exploration, had become a floating tomb, a monument to the horrors that lurk in the depths of the unknown. Each creak of the ship's hull, each groan of its structure, echoed with the memories of those who had perished. The specter of fear and madness haunted every corner, and the true nature of the evil that had claimed the Eagle Hauler remained a mystery, an enigma lost to the unforgiving sea. The diary, now filled with the harrowing account of our journey, would remain hidden, a testament to the terror that unfolded. Perhaps someday, someone would discover it and piece together the chilling tale of the Eagle Hauler and its ill-fated crew. Until then, the ship would continue to drift, a ghost ship lost in the vast expanse of the ocean, carrying the weight of its dark secrets into eternity.
Story 2.
70 miles left to Lisonville. 70 miles. The cheerful, smiling truck driver Harry, whom Tony had stopped on the road, could only take him as far as Windhead. From there, Harry's white and red Kenworth truck was turning west and heading off to good old Oklahoma. But that was fine with Tony. From Windhead to Lissenville was just a hop, skip, and a jump. Tony cheered up. The endless plain under the scorching rays of the summer sun no longer seemed monotonous to him. On the contrary, the sky, clear as crystal, the silvery feather grass, and the rare green hills filled his soul with joy. Only now did he truly realize how much he had missed this plain during the long 3 years of his absence. Missed the light, wispy clouds, the horizon that seemed unreachable. Where he had been, the lush, damp tropics had constantly weighed him down, with almost daily rains soaking everything, softening it. The restless howler monkeys drove him mad with their wild screams, and the nocturnal four-legged and legless creatures rarely let him sleep. And the meaningless war had dulled his senses to the extreme. The only thought that kept him going was that he would return home with the money needed for him and Lizzie to get married, buy a modest house near Windhead, and start a small farm. Only the memory of Lizzie filled his heart with hope and strengthened his spirit. Now the mind-numbing sleepless nights and endless hot battles were behind him. Next to him, the cheerful chatterbox Harry was endlessly talking. The winding ribbon of the highway stretched ahead, and the plain lay sprawling around in the heat. Tony felt lighter than ever. Lizzie. Soon he would see his Lizzie, and the world would regain its former meaning for him. "You should join us, truckers." The driver brought Tony back to reality. "Firstly, it's romantic. Secondly, no one's messing with your head, and the pay is decent. What more does a young guy like you need? Think about it. Together we could go long distances. I used to drive with a partner, but then he died. His liver gave out, or rather what was left of it. Tempting. But Tony hadn't yet thought about what he would do after the army. First, he needed to see Lizzie, and as for work, let it be afraid of him. He wasn't some mama's boy who could be scared off by anything. And it's good for the family, too, if you start one. I'm on the road for almost a week and home for 3 or 4 days. You should see how my wife eagerly pounces on me, sometimes right from the doorstep. Isn't that great? And the kids? Look at these rascals." Harry extended a worn-out, smudged photo. "Tell me they weren't conceived out of love." Tony looked at the amateur photo of Harry's family with interest. In it, a plump, smiling, slightly tousled housewife was tenderly hugging 2 freckled kids who were making faces at the photographer. Tony could almost see her struggling to catch them in the yard, momentarily quieting them with a stern look. But they would continue to tease and pinch each other behind her back. No. Tony hadn't thought that far ahead yet, although he was sure that his and Lizzie's kids would be very beautiful. Nature hadn't skimped on Lizzie's beauty. Her eyes alone, as blue as a clear sky, were worth it. At the thought of his girl, Tony's heart began to pound. When would this long, exhausting journey end so he could see her again? Tony could hardly wait. But finally, there was little, modest Windhead, one of hundreds like it in this part of the state, with its familiar buildings that hadn't changed at all in the 3 years he had been gone. Time seemed to have stood still here. Harry gently slowed down at the town's entrance, said goodbye to Tony like an old friend, wished him luck and a safe journey, then turned left onto the highway bypassing Windhead. Tony headed towards the center, hoping to find a ride to take him further to Lissenville. The long road had worn him out. In the central square near the local bar, about a dozen cars were parked, likely their drivers inside having lunch. Not surprising since it was past noon. Tony, not thinking twice, headed straight there. After the long journey, he was also hungry. Who knows when he would reach Lissenville? Another 7 or 8 miles at least. By car, 10 or 15 minutes. If he found a ride. Lissenville was always off the main roads. It was practically in a dead end, If only one of the locals happened to be here, that would be a stroke of luck. But Tony wasn't going to shout in the bar, "Hey, anyone heading to Lisonville? I need to get there urgently." That would be silly. People would look at him like an idiot, and showing off was never welcome here. Tony sat at one of the free tables. A young waitress, reminding him of Lizzie, approached. Lizzie also worked as a waitress when he met her. The girl smiled sweetly at Tony and asked what he wanted. Tony asked what they had. The girl told him, maybe eggs and bacon and a beer. "Would you like me to bring the beer while the eggs are being prepared?" Tony sensed that the waitress liked him, but he was only thinking about Lizzie waiting for him in Lisonville. "Yes, please," he said, and the girl returned to the counter. While waiting for his meal, Tony looked around. A transient cafe, always sparsely populated with one or two local regulars, the rest travelers. Either tourists, truckers, or sometimes hitchhikers. Tony needed drivers. He picked out 3 or 4 guys that seemed promising and decided to ask them for a ride to Lisonville after his meal. Surely someone would be going that way soon. He just had to not miss the opportunity. When the eggs and bacon arrived, Tony eagerly dug in. He just wanted to stave off hunger, hoping to soon be in Lisonville, but judging by the full plates in front of the guys, they were just starting. He'd have to wait a bit. Although, Tony finished his meal, drank his beer with satisfaction, got up from the table, and slowly approached the bartender. The bartender, a stocky, squat man with a mustache, looked at him questioningly. "There are several cars parked near your bar," Tony began hesitantly. "Do you know if any of them are heading to Lisonville?" The bartender looked at him as if he were half crazy and said nothing. "I mean," Tony tried again, "is anyone going to Lisonville?" "Where are you from, son?" the bartender suddenly asked. "And why are you heading to Lisonville?" "I have a girl there, Lizzie Crawford. Maybe you know her?" The bartender gave him a suspicious look, then said reluctantly, "I don't know anyone there, and I don't want to. And I wouldn't advise you to go there if you haven't been there for a while." "Why?" Tony didn't understand. "Just because," the bartender snapped, making it clear the conversation was over. "Are you ordering anything else? No? Then hit the road and get out of here while you're still alive." The bartender stared Tony straight in the eyes. Tony turned away, trying to make sense of what he had heard. Why was he so adamant? And why did he want to scare him away from Lisonville? While you're still alive. It was strange to hear such words from a law-abiding citizen. Are we in some slaughterhouse? Or is there a war going on? Outside, cars were peacefully parked, their drivers calmly eating their meals. Maybe Tony had missed something when entering Windhead, and there was an invisible front line here? Apparently not. And seasoned veteran Tony Wright could smell war from a mile away. Tony wanted to ask something else, but as soon as he turned to the bartender and opened his mouth, the bartender cut him off. "Are you ordering anything else? No? Then hit the road." Tony resentfully threw a few coins on the counter and asked, "Is this how you greet everyone in Windhead?" The bartender looked at him from under thick eyebrows and said, "Everyone heading to Lisonville." "Got it," Tony said, and dejectedly headed for the exit. The waitress looked at him with pity. The bartender snapped at her. "What are you staring at, fool? Go to the kitchen and wash the cups." The girl obediently left the room. At the door, Tony bumped into a fat policeman coming into the bar, with large drops of sweat streaming down his face. The policeman was wiping it off with a big, dirty handkerchief. Giving Tony a fleeting glance, he approached the bar and asked the bartender to pour him something cold. The bartender leaned close to the policeman's ear and whispered something quickly. But Tony didn't care what they thought of him. He hadn't done anything wrong. and they had no reason to pick on him. Nevertheless, the policeman watched him intently as he left. Tony felt it on his back but didn't turn around. Outside, near an old, dusty Ford truck, he saw a gray-haired man in a red, checkered flannel shirt and blue jeans. He was probably the driver, wiping the rearview mirror with a soft cloth, seemingly preparing to leave. Tony approached him. "Are you by any chance going to Listenville?" The driver looked at him warily. Tony asked again, "I need to get to Listenville. Do you know anyone heading that way?" The driver got into the cab, slammed the door loudly, turned the ignition key, and then said to Tony, "Nothing's been going to Listenville for half a year." He started the truck and drove off, leaving Tony in a cloud of dust, bewildered. How can that be? Tony thought. Could Listenville not exist anymore? Although no one told him it had disappeared, everyone became strange at the mere mention of the town. Tony didn't know what to do. Someone tugged at his sleeve. He turned his head. The waitress from the bar stood next to him. "What do you want?" Tony asked her absently. "I heard you're looking for a ride to Listenville. Don't do it. It's not worth going there." The girl's voice trembled. "Why not?" Tony didn't understand. Would someone finally explain to him what the hell was going on here? But instead of an answer, Tony heard only a commanding, "Becky!" The policeman who had come out of the bar said it. The girl immediately wilted, turned around, and hurried to the back entrance. Tony looked at the policeman with displeasure. The girl could have told him something important, but this pompous cop interrupted her, and now Tony would remain ignorant because of him. Tony was getting angry. The policeman slowly approached, never taking his eyes off him, and demanded his documents. "So you just got back from there," he said, as if talking to himself. "Okay. But why do you need to go to Listenville? Are you local? I don't recall seeing you before." The policeman's curiosity and bluntness began to irritate Tony. "Am I not a free person? Can't I go where I want?" The policeman smirked crookedly. "That's what some movie hero said when the sheriff stopped him in his county. You want to play hero with me, son? I wouldn't recommend it. Better go home and forget about Listenville. There's nothing for you there." The policeman handed Tony his documents back. "I hope you take this good advice." The policeman left Tony alone, got into his car, and as he drove past, saluted him. Tony looked after the police car in bewilderment. No one helped him. No one even explained why he shouldn't go to Listenville. Maybe there's a cholera outbreak or the plague wiped out the population? But wouldn't that be immediately disclosed? They would have told him straight away. Instead, there were only hints, threats, and fear. It made him even more determined to get to Listenville and find Lizzie. How could he live without knowing what happened to her? He wouldn't be at peace for the rest of his life. Now it was a matter of honor. He would walk if he had to, and surely find someone on the way. That's what Tony decided, and without waiting for any drivers, he set off on foot without hesitation. If he walked briskly, he'd reach the place by evening. No doubt, on the war, they covered much greater distances. The road to Listenville branched off from the main highway half a mile from Windhead. Even if he walked, it would take him 3 to 4 hours at most, and walking wasn't new to him. He'd traveled so many miles, so many roads over the 3 years, he'd lost count. Tony still remembered this turn. He and Lizzie often stopped near it, saying their goodbyes. How many years ago was that? 3. It felt like an eternity. He promised Lizzie that as soon as he returned, he would come straight to her. Would she recognize him? And he her? Lizzie had given him her photograph. In it, she was in a pink frilly dress near a lush old pine tree. A teenage girl. She was 18 then. Now she's over 20. A real woman. Would she remember him? In her first letter, Lizzie confessed that he was her first man. That letter, along with the other 11, he still kept in his backpack. At the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag. All 12 letters. In 3 years. Maybe she wrote more, but only 12 reached him. 1 letter every quarter. Less often. But they helped him survive there. Damn war. How it devalues human life. Tony looked back. Windhead had almost disappeared behind the hill. Only a few rooftops and tall antennas peeked out. Around him for miles, there was nothing but plain, occasionally dotted with sparse yellow vegetation. At least it was past noon, and the heat was starting to subside. He thought he saw a white police Ford at the turn. Could the cop be seriously trailing him? Tony quickly slipped into the ditch and watched the police car from there. But it didn't take the road to Lissenville, and after standing at the crossroads for a few minutes, it turned back to Windhead. Did they spot him in the car or not? Probably not. Otherwise, they would have come here and started pestering him with their silly questions. Where? Why? Annoying. What had he done that was so forbidden that he had to hide like a criminal? Nothing. And since nothing, there's no reason to pester him. Tony got back on the road, brushed the dry grass off his pants. Somewhere above, like a sign, a lark chirped. Tony tried to spot it in the sky, but in vain. It seemed to blend with the velvety blue, and even the light white clouds appeared motionless. He had to keep going. It would soon get dark, and he didn't want to spend the night in the plain. Tony quickened his pace. He was already eager to see Lizzie as soon as possible. The closer he got to Lissenville, the more confident he was that Lizzie would recognize him immediately. She just couldn't not recognize him. After all, he was her first man. The small, squat houses of Lissenville, surrounded by sparse greenery, appeared around 6 in the evening. Tony felt a surge of warmth and recognition. This town wasn't his home, but it had become a part of his soul because his girl, Lizzie Crawford, lived here, and he had no doubt she had been waiting for him all these long, terrible 3 years. 3 years. For some, they flew by like 3 days, for others like 3 weeks. Tony seemed to remember every day of those years. Every day. Tony entered the town. Lissenville hadn't grown at all in the 3 years he had been away. It seemed even to have declined, though the main buildings remained. In the distance, the dull gray spire of the local church could be seen. Nearby, a single-story police station and Thomas Paine's cozy little cafe. It was in this cafe that Tony first saw Lizzie. She worked there as a waitress. When saying goodbye, Tony bought her a bright red silk scarf. Lizzie gratefully kissed Tony. Lower near the ravine was a modest hotel with separate rooms in the courtyard. Tony used to stay there since Lizzie's mother was ill. Now she's gone. 2 years ago, Lizzie buried her. That letter was probably the hardest. It carried so much sorrow and despair, so much pleading. Lizzie had begged Tony to return to her quickly, but could he decide to stay or return then? He was a soldier. He gnawed at the wet ground, drank swampy sludge, camouflaged in lush jungles, and could only dream of ever being here again. Tony sent back a long letter, full of love and compassion, hoping it would reach Lizzie and ease her heartache. It probably did, and Lizzie must have felt better from his words. How many times had he repeated those words without letters after battles, without any assurance that she would hear them? Yes, Lissenville hadn't changed a bit. The same modest wooden houses, the same white, sun-faded low wooden fences, and green lawns in front of them. Except the paint on the houses had peeled a bit, and the lawns had grown wild. The town seemed to be dying. No one could even repaint their homes. Tony turned left toward the church, and for the second time that day was surprised. He had walked almost halfway through Lisonville and hadn't met a single living soul. Had everyone left? No. There by the fence stood one resident, but he looked at Tony strangely. His gaze was wary and somehow predatory. He didn't even respond to Tony's greeting. Tony walked past, feeling a chill run down his spine. What the heck? He thought. The next person Tony met also stood motionless by his fence, gripping the wooden slats. And his gaze became as oily as the previous ones as soon as Tony approached. Like zombies, Tony laughed to himself, but the laugh wasn't cheerful, more defensive. He was beginning to dislike the people in Lisonville itself. How could a normal person live in such an atmosphere? If only I could see Lizzie soon, he thought, relieved when he saw her house. But it didn't seem lived in either. The lawns were overgrown with weeds, choking the once lush rose bushes under the windows. The lilac on the corner had become dense and wild. The low fence in front of the house was leaning, the paint on it, like on the house, cracked and peeled in places, hanging in ragged strips. Could it be that no one lives here anymore? Tony thought as he slowly climbed the porch steps. They creaked under his feet. The door was unlocked, though the inside wasn't ransacked. The furniture was the same as the last time he visited, though it was covered in a thick layer of dust and had darkened. The window panes were covered with fly spots. The curtains faded. Where was Lizzie? Tony walked into the living room. Nothing had changed. Even the old photos still hung on the walls. There was Lizzie, her mother, Lizzie again. Everything remained in place, but there was no sense of life. What happened? Plague, epidemic. Tony went outside. By the fence stood people, 5 or 6 of them, staring at him intently and expectantly. Among them, Tony noticed the first people he had met earlier. All were dressed in some shabby, greasy rags. They're sick. Tony thought when he saw a man with long, viscous saliva dripping from his lips. The town is really infected with some cholera. No wonder everyone in Windhead advised him not to come here. But Lizzie. Is she sick too? Or dead? Tony's mind was in turmoil. On the war, he couldn't even think such a thought. But when Lizzie's letters stopped coming 6 months ago, he feared she had forgotten him, tired of waiting, found someone else. There were so many young, enterprising, reckless guys around. Maybe Lizzie fell for one of them? Maybe she got married. That's what Tony thought there. He thought and allowed everything. Everything except death. Now he didn't rule out even that. Wasn't it obvious from these unfortunate people that they were infected with some terrible, incurable disease? Could a normal, healthy person look with such glazed eyes unless drunk, high, or utterly exhausted? And when Tony entered Lisonville and now, the expressions on these people's faces hadn't changed. They remained impenetrable. Their eyes glazed and continued to cloud. And one of them even grinned so maliciously that Tony involuntarily recoiled and painfully scratched himself on the nettles entwined in the low branches of the lilac. Tony felt uneasy. He wasn't afraid of these people, but he felt he needed to be cautious around them. A madman's actions are unpredictable. Maybe that's why they looked at him in Windhead as if he were crazy, so eager to get into this hellhole. Tony hesitated. Who to ask where Lizzie was now? Maybe she managed to get out and leave. She couldn't have stayed here after her mother died in this heating environment. Tony decisively headed towards the church. There, in the center, he thought, he would more likely find a sane person and get all the answers. The crowd, like it was tied to him, followed Tony but kept a distance, seemingly waiting for something. Like wolves, Tony thought, never taking his eyes off them. From afar, he saw the familiar cafe with the large faded sign, Thomas Paine. Lizzie used to work there, so Thomas Paine should know where she went. Who else? On the narrow winding path, Tony turned towards the cafe. At the entrance, arms crossed over his broad chest, stood the owner himself. Tony still remembered him. Thomas Paine remained a large and strong man. Seeing Tony, he seemed not to react to his appearance, not even raising an eyebrow, but noticing the crowd trailing Tony, he arched his back, dropped his arms, clenched his huge fists, and glared at the followers. They stopped, hesitant to move further, but Paine found it insufficient. He suddenly barked, "Get lost, mutts!" And the crowd immediately thinned out, soon completely dispersing into the hidden corners. Tony was surprised, but didn't change his decision. Approaching Thomas Paine, he was about to ask about Lizzie when he suddenly saw her through the cafe's window. She stood frozen, staring right at Tony. Lizzie. Lizzie. His mind pounded, and he barely restrained himself from rushing to her. Something held him back. What? He couldn't understand, but he felt he was doing the right thing by not rushing to her. Besides, he wouldn't be able to bypass the giant Paine, who towered over him like a colossus. Dealing with this one would take a while, Tony thought, and looked back at the cafe window, but Lizzie had already disappeared. Hadn't she recognized him? Thomas Paine gave Tony what seemed like an appraising look, like a butcher evaluating livestock before slaughter. Tony tried to distract himself from these intrusive thoughts. He suddenly wanted to meet Lizzie alone. Where could he send Paine? Tony asked, "Your town is small. I guess there's no place to stay overnight." "Why not?" Thomas Paine looked at him arrogantly. "I have rooms nearby. You can rent one and spend the night." "Wonderful," Tony exclaimed, not hiding his joy. Here was a chance to get Paine away. "Then maybe you could prepare one for me? Do you have help?" "I'll send my wife," Thomas Paine said. "Room 11. It's the warmest. Wait near it. Lizzie will be there soon. How long are you staying?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a day, maybe more. Depends on my business." "Business?" Thomas Paine smirked. "What business could there be in our quiet town?" "I'm meeting someone here," Tony lied without blinking. "We have an arrangement. He should arrive soon, maybe tomorrow." "Well, business is good. Room 11. Go diagonally. My wife won't take long." Thomas Paine turned and disappeared into the cafe. Lizzie? Lizzie. Tony's mind raced. Could she have become this clumsy Paine's wife? Couldn't she wait for me, or did something serious happen? Tony didn't know what to think. All the hotel cottages looked the same, differing only by small, nailed-on numbers. Tony easily found room 11 and anxiously waited for Lizzie. He hoped she would come alone so they could talk without interruption. 5 minutes later, the girl appeared from behind the cafe and slowly approached. Tony was on edge. It was her, his Lizzie. Though she had changed, she looked gaunt and darker. He would recognize her among 1,000. How could he forget those dear features? They had appeared in his dreams throughout the long 3 years of separation. How many times had he imagined their reunion, imagined embracing her, holding her close, looking into her charming eyes, gently running his fingers over her face to feel every dimple, every contour, every trembling vein. But now he probably wouldn't even be able to exchange a few words with her. At the corner of the cafe stood Thomas Paine again, in his monumental pose with crossed arms. Even from here, it was clear how much suspicion and hostility his gaze held. Yet Tony dared to speak to Lizzie, keeping an eye on Paine. He spoke in a half-whisper, barely moving his lips, fearing Paine might read them, and Tony didn't want any trouble for Lizzie. But it was hard to restrain himself. Lizzie, he saw, was also agitated. She had recognized him after all, couldn't forget him. And how unbearable it was to be so close and not even touch each other. Tony and Lizzie reached the room. The girl gestured for him to stop, opened the door, and entered. Tony half hidden from Payne's view, but didn't dare step inside. He might lose control, fall at her feet, and start kissing them. In these strange and unpredictable circumstances, it would be madness. For now, Tony could only secretly admire his beloved and keep an eye on Payne. As soon as Lizzie entered the room, she forgot about the bed, pressed her chest to the door jamb from the side invisible to her husband, and fully gave in to her emotions. She quickly and almost incoherently, through gasps and sighs, started talking. There was so much love in her words, so much joy and yet so much pain. But Lizzie, Tony couldn't hold back. Why? Why are you with him? Don't ask, Tony, don't ask, my love. I'm not the same at all, the girl said and cried. Lizzie. Tony was breathless with excitement. But why can't we leave? I came for you, Lizzie, for you. No, you can't, Tony, you can't. Not anymore. She cried again. And you can't stay here. There's death all around, Tony. Leave. I won't go anywhere without you, Lizzie, nowhere. The girl was desperate. Please, leave and don't ask anything. Please, Tony, please. They didn't finish talking. Tony noticed that Thomas Payne, apparently worried about the prolonged check-in, was heading straight towards them. Tony told Lizzie, and she quickly started making the bed. When Payne appeared at the threshold, Lizzie had already wiped her tears and was dusting the tables. Why so long? He asked sternly. There's so much dust here, she replied, hiding her red eyes. You know, there haven't been guests here for a long time. Okay, go. That's enough cleaning. Payne stared intently at Tony, and when Lizzie left, smiled maliciously and said, I wish the young man a peaceful night. Just make sure to lock up tight. Our little town may be small, but it's restless. Newcomers often find it uncomfortable. Thanks for the warning, Tony said, not taking his eyes off Payne's. I'll take your kind advice. Payne left, and Tony immediately bolted the door. How strange everything was in this Listenville, he thought, left alone. At first, no one wanted to give him a lift. Then the odd bunch of sickly folks following him. Then a subdued Lizzie and this Payne with his cryptic hints. And the atmosphere? Some kind of suffocating atmosphere. Some incomprehensible feeling of something unusual. And animals. How had he not noticed right away? He hadn't seen a single dog or cat on his way. He couldn't recall if he had even heard the chirping of ordinary sparrows in the town. The air was dry and stale, the buildings dilapidated, the people sick, the strange pain, the tormented Lizzie. Tony felt suffocated. What's going on here, damn it? He kept asking himself, unable to find an answer. It got dark. Tony crawled into bed, trying once more to analyze what he had seen and heard, but he couldn't make any sense of it. Everything was too vague, too mysterious, and inexplicable. What was he going to do? Lizzie clearly didn't love her husband. That was immediately obvious. Maybe Payne was holding her by force, tied her to him with debts, threats, or fear. Closer to midnight, Tony heard distinct footsteps outside the door. It seemed someone was sneaking around the windows, trying to remain unnoticed. Occasionally, a shadow would flit across the window illuminated by the bright full moon. And suddenly Tony heard a clinking sound. It was like someone had kicked an empty beer can. Tony had excellent hearing. Rising from the bed, he listened. The sound didn't repeat. Even so, Tony got up, dressed, approached the window, and peered out from behind the curtain. It seemed like no one was there. And again, it seemed to him that a shadow slid across the ground, Tony unbolted the door and flung it open. About 25 yards from his cottage stood the same 5 or 6 people Tony had taken for sick. They stood rooted to the spot, staring at Tony. The huge round moon was behind them, so neither their eyes nor expressions were visible. Tony got scared and quickly shut the door. He was in plain sight. He was completely exposed and defenseless. Tony was initially confused, but then tried to pull himself together. It wasn't clear what they intended, but he wouldn't give in easily. He would defend himself. He would fight. To the death. He was convinced that the state of Lizzie was partly their fault. They had taken Lizzie from him. They had made her this way. Tony tried to muster the courage to assess the situation rationally, but he had so little time. Someone was already tugging at the door handle. Someone was scratching the window glass. Tony ripped the wooden bed from its place and dragged it to the door, barricading the entrance. He added a heavy nightstand on top and then a chair. Maybe it would hold. They kept pushing against the door. One hit, then another. It was a pity he didn't have a gun. He would have shown these thugs what for. Still, Tony unscrewed the leg from one of the nightstands. In skilled hands, it could be a formidable weapon. Tony felt its weight. If he struck well, he could not only subdue an attacker but also send him to the next world. In the meantime, the pounding on the door continued. The bolt had long been knocked off, and the barricade was even slightly shifted by the force of Tony's attackers. It was astonishing how powerful and strong these brazen intruders were. Outside, there was a real uproar. Every kind of noise filtered through: screeching, clinking, dog howling, and animal growling. It felt like the entire missing animal kingdom had gathered around Tony's cottage. They had already broken the window, and the upper half of the door was cracking, and Tony didn't even know what to do. He huddled in the corner opposite the door, clutching the nightstand leg tightly, prepared for anything. But what he saw stunned him with its unpredictability. When the upper half of the door shattered into splinters from another strong blow, the gaping maw suddenly revealed a snarling, slobbering muzzle of a huge wolf. Its bloodshot eyes glowed with madness, looking ravenous. Another equally ferocious face was pushing through the window. But they weren't wolves, Tony immediately understood. The beasts were bigger, more massive, and bloodthirsty. If it weren't for the thick, ruffled fur and wolfish snouts, Tony wouldn't have distinguished them from people, for they smashed everything with their front paws, leaning on the door with enormous, powerful chests. Then it dawned on Tony. That's why he hadn't seen a single animal here. The whole town was inhabited by its own beasts. By day, they were sick, tormented people. By night, bloodthirsty, vile creatures prowling the area for prey. And Lizzie was one of them. His Lizzie. Now he knew exactly who was to blame for making Lizzie this way. They wouldn't get any mercy from him. The werewolves, taking advantage of Tony's brief hesitation, almost burst into the room. How many were there? 6, 7, 8. Tony didn't count. They could have gathered even more during his time in Lisonville. Still, what was one man against such a mass of monsters? Tony realized he had no choice and never would. He would die, but he wouldn't go down alone. He would take a handful of particularly eager attackers with him to the grave. He had nothing to lose, nowhere to run. Tony lunged at one of the monsters and jabbed the nightstand leg into its eye. It howled wildly and fell out of the window. Another grotesque face immediately replaced it. Tony punched it in the eye. He smashed a light nightstand over the head of the one pushing through the door, but it was enough to take the beast out for a few minutes. If the werewolves were those sickly creatures trailing him through Lisonville, there was nothing to fear. He could handle them. But if there were a couple of giants like Payne, he'd be in trouble. He couldn't forget about them. Surely, the entire town consisted of these beasts. He could only hope to break out of the room and reach some car. But that was for later. Now, he needed to deal with the friends so eager to join his party. Tony jabbed another one in the eye. They left him no choice. Only brutal retaliation, remembering everything he had been taught in the war, could help him survive. And Tony got angry. He seemed to channel all the pain of losing loved ones and friends there, in the war, and the pain of Lizzie here. Only by fighting fiercely, even in a hopeless battle from all sides, could he hope to survive. How long did Tony fight the werewolves? Minutes, 2, 20, an hour? Time seemed to stand still. He was tired of shaking off the furry paws of the monsters, no longer paying attention to the stinging wounds from their sharp claws, mechanically continuing to fend off the creatures with whatever came to hand, when suddenly a huge brute appeared in the gaping door, baring its teeth and growling so fiercely that the walls seemed to shake. Tony and all the werewolves froze for a second. It was clear they were also scared of him. Now, Tony thought, his end had truly come. He couldn't handle the giant pain in this confined space, and breaking free wasn't easy. Even those who seemed unconscious under the window could attack at any moment. But as soon as the brute Payne crossed the room's threshold, another werewolf leaped at him from behind, biting into his neck with sharp fangs. Could it be Lizzie? Flashed through Tony's mind, but he wasn't allowed to finish the thought. The bloodthirsty pack attacked him again, but now Tony wasn't alone. Now he wouldn't be an easy prey. Still, something unexpected happened. Someone struck Tony hard. A piece of flesh was torn from his shoulder, and sharp pain instantly clouded his mind. Tony woke up only in the morning. His head buzzed and hummed as if filled with a swarm of bees. He couldn't believe he was still alive. After such a beating, no one would have survived, let alone him, Tony, already worn and battered by life. Around him was a horrific scene. 6 or 7 mutilated bodies, unrecognizable, all dead. Tony himself felt shattered. His body ached, his shirt was in tatters, his chest covered in blood, his arms and shoulders scratched, one eye swollen shut, and he could barely see. But there was no time to lie around. He had to find Lizzie quickly, take her and get away from here. Tony got up, slowly made his way to the exit, stepping over the bodies, but stopped at the threshold. Under the window, unnaturally sprawled, lay Lizzie, horribly mutilated, with her throat torn out. Tony's legs gave way. In a daze, he collapsed next to her. She had been one of them after all. But something had stopped her from attacking Tony as her comrades had. Could she have remembered him even in wolf form? Remembered and saved his life. Oh, Lizzie, Lizzie, how absurd life is. He should have protected her, but it turned out she protected him. Here, in the peaceful sanctuary amidst the endless plain, in a small town called Lisonville, in a secluded, long-forgotten town. Tony didn't know what to do now, where to go, who to turn to. Someone approached him. Tony looked up and saw the same policeman from Winhead. Even the police come here? The policeman walked up to Tony and without explaining anything put handcuffs on him. Tony didn't resist. He didn't care anymore. They could do whatever they wanted with him, take him wherever they wanted. He was nobody now, disgusted with life. He didn't know why he should even live. For what? The policeman lifted Tony from the ground and led him away, probably to the station. He led him without asking any questions. For that, Tony was grateful. The last thing he wanted right now was to explain anything. Passing by the cafe, Tony thought he saw Thomas Payne standing behind the glass, but looking more closely, which wasn't easy given his swollen eye, he saw nothing. The cafe was empty. At the station, the policeman shoved Tony behind bars. Tony collapsed onto the bench by the wall and soon fell into a dead sleep. He was utterly exhausted. As he drifted off, he noticed the policeman pulling out a bottle of aperitif and placing it on the table. When Tony woke up, the station was lit, and the policeman was sitting at the table with another man. This second man was huge, his back turned to Tony. Tony was still weak, so he didn't get up, pretending to be asleep. The men were talking about something. The policeman often laughed in a short, staccato way and squinted his eyes. The large man occasionally turned around, but Tony, peeking through a web of eyelashes, couldn't make out his face clearly. By his build, the man reminded Tony of Thomas Paine, but he wasn't sure. Losing interest in the pair, Tony started to recall the events of the past day. How incredible they seemed. Strange people, Thomas Paine, Lizzie. It all felt like a dream, an absurdity. Tony sat up. Maybe it was time to confront these idiots. By what right were they holding him here? Had he robbed someone? Killed someone? Tony was about to shout at the policeman, but the policeman noticed Tony had awakened and nudged the man sitting next to him. The man half turned and Tony almost screamed. The big guy was indeed Thomas Paine. Seeing Tony, Thomas Paine grinned broadly, showing his teeth, and growled low like an animal. At that moment, the muscles on his arms, shoulders, and back tensed and bulged. His shirt started to tear, and his torn, bloody face began to transform into the hideous muzzle of a wolf. A monstrous, bloodthirsty, enormous wolf.